Hey everyone, it's Mark here at CG Spectrum. Today's lesson we're going to focus on anticipation, or antic as it's known in the biz. Anticipation is an important fundamental used to build energy before an action. Antics can also be used to flesh out characters' thought process, and characters that appear to be thinking are clearly more compelling than those that appear not to be thinking. A couple of examples where we wouldn't use anticipation is when animating a hiccup, say, or maybe an impact where your character gets hit by something. But other than that, we use them a lot. They're extremely important. For this assignment, we're going to block out our poses with our curves set to stepped mode. This will keep our process relatively simple and help ensure that our poses are as strong as they can be. Now remember, in animation, posing is the process, motion is the result, and get used to hearing me repeat that little nugget. We're going to start with a fully articulated character to illustrate examples of anticipation, and then move on to a simple ball for the actual assignment. All right, let's do it. All right, so the first thing I like to do when I open up Maya with my character is I want to just go through a few settings to make sure that I'm up and running and ready to go. The first thing I like to do is up here in the selection panel is I like to turn everything off except for this button here, which is NURBS curves. What this is it's a selection panel. So now, if I want to animate this character and I want to select the curves, all I can select are these NURBS curves. I can't select any geometry. If the geometry was turned on, you could see if I went to select one of the controllers, I might accidentally select the geometry, and I don't want to do that. So I just want to select the NURBS curve, so I turn everything off so it's just NURBS curves there. Then what I like to do is I like to make sure that down here that my auto key is on. I like to grab all of my NURBS curves and go to my first frame and just hit S and set my first key, so my first key is set. And now, working in auto key, every time I move any part of the body, it's going to automatically set a key. For some people, that's a bit of a clunky workflow to get used to, but once you get used to it, you'll find that it'll speed you up and it'll help you with your animation workflow. All right, so next let's go over here in this right beside the auto key button. We're going to click on this little button, and that's our preferences panel. All right, we can also access our preferences panel up here at Window, Settings, Preferences, and we can click it here, but it's just as easy to click it down here. It opens up, and I want to make sure that my update view is set to all, in case I have two separate views. And now I want to go into my animation panel here, and I want to set my default out tangents to stepped. Because as I said, we're going to block out our animation, so we want to block out our animation in step mode, which is similar to how we would do it if we were traditionally drawing the animation. We would just draw our key poses. So we want to just set our key poses first, and then I'll go ahead and hit save. All right, so for this example, I'm going to turn off the NURBS curves, and I'm just going to walk through this and just show you basically what anticipation is all about. So here I have my character, comfortably relaxed, sort of staring off into space, and that's my first pose. My next pose is going to be my character reacting to something. So here is my character reacting to something. Now, if I just go back and forth between these two, it just snaps to them. Now, if I was to even give some space to that and let the computer in between that, it still would just feel like this big slow in between, and there wouldn't be anything to build up that energy to make our character go from this pose to this pose. So what I do instead is I add an anticipation. So for something like this, I would go in and I'd block out a third pose in between those two poses, and it would look something like that, which is an anticipation pose. Now you can see how these three work in concert. And this is sort of a simple take, and how this anticipation pose is helping build that energy. And then boom, the energy is released and we go into our pose. Now we have these three poses. Another example for an anticipation pose is if we were doing something of a, this movement here is sort of a surprise take. But let's do an example of a take where it's a planned take. So say we have a character who's, say, throwing a ball. So we have our key poses. We have, again, our beginning pose. We'll just leave it the same. And our second pose, or our next extreme pose, is going to be this pose of this character throwing the ball. And these are the two extremes. Not overly extreme, I know, but again, if I was just to animate between these two without any anticipation poses, it would look very robotic and it would look very, very strange. So what I do instead is I will go in and I'll add an anticipation pose. It looks a bit more like a dance pose. But you can see how these three are now working together. Pose 1, anticipation, and then throw. We need to flesh that out even a little bit more. So we have like a slight anticipation here, into there, and then the throw. So you can see how, as we start building poses, you can see how the anticipation poses are going to help us build up that energy and then release that energy. So now let's take what we just learned here and apply it to the bouncing ball. Okay, so we just finished looking at why we use anticipation. Now let's look at a real-world approach here. So we're going to start with our bouncing ball. Now, I think you've already used the bouncing ball. For this assignment, we're going to use a small number of controls. We're going to use the ball move control, of course, to move the ball around. We're going to leave this controller here, which is the placement controller. We're not going to move it. We're going to leave that where it is. To move the ball, we're going to use this one here, the outside ring, which is the ball move control. To squash the ball, we're going to use this top controller, and we're going to use this bottom controller if we need to. And I'm not sure that we'll need to for this assignment, but if we need to, we'll use that. And then this, of course, is the rotate controller. Again, I'm not sure if we're going to use this one or not. Either we'll look into that as we go. Okay, so as always, when we first open up Maya, I want to go through and set up my Maya the way I like to have it set up. So I deselect all this stuff over here, make sure that my auto key is turned on, check my preferences, and we want to be set up in stepped. There we go. And then, of course, now I want to select my entire character in all my characters' curves, rather, and hit a key, so we're keyed here on frame 1. Now I want to go through and just block out what my original poses are going to be. So we'll start with this pose here on frame 1. I'm going to hold that pose for 8 frames. So I'm just going to go over to frame 8 here, and I'm going to hit a key. So that's my hold. Nothing's happening there. Now I want to go, let's say for my next pose, I'm going to go to my next extreme. I'm going to start with 3 poses. So I'm going to go to my next extreme. I'm going to go to frame 12 for that. And I can shift this around. I can shift my poses around, shift their timing around, sorry, if I need to. But for now, I'm just going to put it on frame 12, which is just 4 frames. 4 frames just seems easy for me. It seems reasonable. I know what 4 frames feels like. You'll have your own specific workflow, but for now, we'll just start on 4s here. Now, I have a key set here, so I'm going to pose this key here. So I'm going to start with the extreme. I'm going to say my extreme anticipation pose. I'm saying that my ball is going to be jumping this way off screen. So my anticipation is going to be over in screen left. So it's going to be jumping screen right. My anticipation is going to be screen left. So I'm just going to drag this guy over here and up. And that's going to be our anticipation. And then I'm going to want to do a squash. So I'm going to go from that anticipation. I'm going to want to hold that anticipation. So it's going to go up into this pose. I'm going to want to hold that pose for 4 frames. So I'm just going to middle mouse click and hold down here in the timeline. I'm going to drag that key to frame 16. I'm going to let go of my middle mouse button and I'm going to hit S. And that's just going to mean that I've just copied that pose over. And that's just a simple way to copy keys in the timeline. You hold down the middle mouse button, you drag it, you let go of the middle mouse button, and you hit S, and that will set that key there. Now I'm going to go into the passing pose of when this ball jumps. I'm going to do that over 2 frames. I'm going to set another key there, and now I'm going to go to this squash here. I'm going to 0 it off so I know where to start from. Then I'm going to squish it down. So anticipation, squash, and then he's going to leap forward in another 2 frames. Let's go 2 more frames forward. I'm going to put a key there and grab my top squash. Again, I'm going to just 0 it out. I often like to just 0 these things out. If my extremes are so big, I like to 0 it out so that I'm not carrying over any weird attributes. I'm just starting from scratch. So now he's going to be jumping. I'm going to have 1 more frame here where he's on the ground, and it'll just be for a second. feel like this might want to be up in the air, but I'm going to leave it on the ground for now. And then I'm going to go 2 more frames again. I'm going to key that, and I'm going to grab his mover here, his main mover. I'm going to hold down the W key and left mouse click. And just make sure that that's set to object, which it is. Typically when it's set to object, what I'm doing by holding down W and left clicking is I can set how my manipulator here, which is this guy that I use to move him around, how it's oriented. So right now it's oriented to the object, which is the object of the ball. And because I haven't rotated the ball, it's oriented straight up and down, which is okay for now. And I'm just going to drag that over and up to there. And we'll just leave it at that. So that's the broad motion of our ball jumping out of this anticipation and jumping off screen. Okay. We just animated on 24 frames so far. We can expand that, but we'll just use that now for our basic anticipation. I assume I'm going to need more frames through here. So I'm going to drag my timeline out now at this point to 48 frames. And I'm going to give myself, from frame 8 to frame 12, I'm going to give myself 4 more frames. So I'm just going to drag that to frame 16. And why I'm doing that is because I think I just want this move. Oops, I made the mistake of dragging it when I didn't have everything selected. So I'm going to select everything. Hold down Shift and left click and drag, and I get this red bar here. And then if I grab these 2 arrows in the middle, I can shift all those keys forward. Now, the reason why I did that is because I think I want this, the move into this anticipation to be a little bit more detailed. So here's my idea. I can't just snap into this, because if I go ahead and spline this, if I click on my graph editor here, and I go ahead and spline this motion, it just drags, it just feels very robotic and it drags into it. So what I'd like to do instead is I want to have at frame, let's go to frame 12. I'm going to set down another key here, and I'm going to set down a squash there. So that squash is kind of an anticipation into this. I'm going to squash a little bit too much. I think that's a bit extreme. What if we did this? So now I want this to move in sort of an arc, in sort of a circular fashion. We always want to think about arcs. And I want this to move in kind of an arced motion here. So I'm going to go to frame 10. And I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to move it this way a little bit. And maybe even up. And the idea is that we get a little movement here this way. We don't want much. And down. And then here on frame 14, I'm going to go into frame 14 here. And I'm going to do this little trick to find an in-between here between 12 and 16. I'm just going to grab frames 12 and 16 in the graph editor. I'm going to spline it. I'm going to put a key down, and then I'm going to put it back into step. And that's not exactly the in-between that I want, but it gets me kind of partially of the way there. And what I want to do here is I just want to play a little bit with the rotation. Just to get a bit of overlap. Just make this thing feel there we go. Now this is all on 2s, and we can adjust the timing of that if we want, but I like the poses that I have. And we can adjust the timing. I would grab everything again to adjust that timing and say I want them to start a little bit more slowly. So maybe I just want to grab these keys and just shift them a frame forward. Maybe coming down here, we want to have it a bit more slowly, moving a bit more slowly as well. Again, I'm just holding down Shift and left clicking and dragging to get it to make sure that to get all that red highlighted in red, and then I can just drag it using these keys. Carefully, don't drag it using these outside arrows, because what that will do is that will scale it, and we don't want to do that. I mean, eventually we might, but for now we don't. We just want to shift them. So I'm going to shift that a key. And now we can have it so it's a bit more slow, and then it speeds up. So it goes through here a bit more slowly, and then it speeds up coming out into its hold. So I think I like that. I think that's a pretty good anticipation. I don't think it holds long enough. And here's our hold. Remember, our hold is between frame 18 and 22, and that's the exact same pose. So let's just take that and let's stretch that a couple more frames. Let's take it a few. Let's take it 4 more frames. So we get a nice hold, and then he jumps. Now, what we don't want is we don't want this hold to lock up. And if we look on our graph editor, we can see that our pose here on 18 and our pose here on 26 are exactly the same. And you can tell they're exactly the same because you don't have any of this stepped motion going through here. There's no difference in the keys. They're all exactly the same. Now, we don't want that to be exactly the same because our hold will lock up and look very, very robotic. We want to have a little bit of movement in there. So what I like to do with these holds, or how I like to build an in-between for these holds so we can slow into that hold, is I'll go in here again and I'll just grab these keys and I'll spline them. And then instead of putting a key on frame 18 here where my key is, I'll go back 1 frame to 17, and you can see 17 isn't quite where 18 is. It's a little bit behind, and I'll set a key there. And then I'll go to 18 and I will delete that key. I'll go back to 17. I'll select it and put it where 18 was. Go back and make sure that they're splined again. And now you will see that there's a slight bit of movement here up into frame 26. See that? Now that it's splined, now it no longer locks up. You get a slight bit of movement, and it's what that's called is a bit of a slow in. And I've just built a bit of a slow in. How that looks in the curves is if I grab this is our top squash and stretch controller is the one doing all the work here. If I grab that and take a look at what it looks like in our we're mostly translating it on translation Z here and translation Y. And if we look at that now, what we had before was we had this key was set exactly the same as the other one, right? These 2 keys were exactly the same, and you had this flat tangent here. And by just dragging that up a little bit, we get a little bit of movement. And the same thing with Y. If we look at Y, before it was up here, which meant that it didn't have any movement, just stuck. And we've dragged it down to here, so you have this long, easy slow in. And then from that slow in, once it hits to frame 26, which is its extreme, that's when we get this movement into its next move. So here is where we've built in all that energy, building it with our anticipation, and here's the release. Let's just go ahead and grab all this stuff. Go into our graph editor, select everything, and let's just spline it, again using auto tangents here. And let's just play that. So what I urge you guys to do now is just to go through it and play around with it. Get your keys set, and you can see I have 1 and 8 are exactly the same. So I have basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 26 is kind of the same as 18, but it's 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 to get it off screen. So 9, 10 poses to get it off screen, and with those 10 poses, I have a fairly well articulated anticipation and release. And it's very basic, but it gets you an idea on how that works. You can start to play with the thought process within that anticipation if you like. You know, if something, say, for example, if this ball sitting here and another smaller ball rolls up and you might have a faster take, it might not go this way quite so fast. It might just be something, say, you could delete that key and move this one back. So it's a faster take. Again, play with the timing and have some fun with it. So that's it for lesson 3, our intro to anticipation. Lesson 4 is going to be intro to overlap, follow through, drag, all that kind of fun stuff. So stick with us. We'll carry on, and happy animating.